Questions to the Prime Minister. Jeremy Corbyn.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the whole House will first wish to join me in sending our profound condolences to the families and friends of Warrant Officer Second Class Dan Shirley of 13th Air Assault Support Regiment Royal Logistics Corps and Lance Corporal James Johnson of 5th Battalion, the Royal Regiment of Scotland, who have given their lives in Afghanistan in the past week. We owe them and all those who have served an immense debt of gratitude. Mr. Speaker, Afghanistan is the front line against the Taliban. 40 nations under a UN mandate are contributing over 50,000 troops. Over 6 million children are now in school. There has been a 25% fall in infant mortality. We will not set an artificial timetable, but as the capability of the Afghan National Security Forces improve, Afghan forces will take over more and more responsibility for their own affairs.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I agree with every word the Prime Minister has just said about Zimbabwe. The clearest possible message should go out that we do not recognise the illegitimate presidency of Robert Mugabe. Can I join the Prime Minister in paying tribute to Lance Corporal James Johnson and Warrant Officer Second Class Dan Shirley, who were killed in Afghanistan? Their fight in Afghanistan is not just about the stability of that country, but, as the Prime Minister has said, about keeping our streets safe here in Britain. Will the Prime Minister confirm what he said on the 42 days vote, that no deals were made, no jobs were offered and no rewards were promised?
Yes.
I'm grateful for that very short and very clear answer, so perhaps he can explain this. This morning a letter has been published by the Daily Telegraph from the Labour Chief Whip to the Right Honourable Member for Leicester East. And the letter says this: "Thank you for all of your help during the period leading up to last Wednesday's votes. I wanted you to know how much I appreciated all of your help. I trust that it will be appropriately rewarded." Can the Prime Minister tell us what the Chief Whip meant by appropriately rewarded?
That we thank the Chairman of the Home Affairs Committee for doing exactly the right thing, for voting in the spirit of the report of the Home Affairs Committee and voting with the government. And as for the Ulster Unionist and the Democratic Unionist Party, as for the allegations being made about that, I think he should listen to what they say about terrorism. They know more about it than almost any people in this House.
Haven't we once again seen the Prime Minister's utter inability to be straight with people? Why can't he give a straight answer to a straight question? The Chief Whip.
Order. Leader of the Opposition. Order.
The Chief Whip, who should be wriggling with embarrassment, he wrote to the Chairman of the Home Affairs Select Committee, that is his job, and said, "I trust you will be appropriately rewarded." So let me ask him again. Don't take people for fools. Tell us the truth. What did he mean?
He meant that he was thanking the Chairman of the Home Affairs Committee for doing exactly the right thing. And if he has any allegation to make,
Prime Minister. Order. Nick Clegg.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to add my own expressions of sympathy and condolence to the family and friends of Lance Corporal James Johnson and Warrant Officer Dan Shirley, who tragically lost their lives in Afghanistan this week. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has this week published yet another government review of the National Health Service. But what does it say about him and his government that after 11 years, 1 1/4 of all British people now face mental health problems? Every single day, more than 1,700 children are prescribed antidepressant drugs, and millions of mental health patients, some of the most vulnerable people in the NHS, are still having to wait for 3 years to get help. Would you agree with me that we now have a two-tier health system in which millions of mental health patients are being left behind?
Mr. Speaker, let me just say we've increased spending on mental health by 31% in real terms in the last 10 years. There are now 60% more consultant psychiatrists in the National Health Service working, and there are 20% more mental health nurses. Now, that is only possible because of the investment that we have made in the National Health Service, which is far beyond what any of the other parties offered or promised at any election. And that is why there are 80,000 more nurses. That is why we're doing 1 million more operations. And that is why today this party, and I believe the whole House, should be proud of 60 years of success of the National Health Service. I am proud it was a Labour government that created. I hope it will have the support of all parties in this House.
He's doing it again. He's confusing a list with an answer. He's confusing a review with action. There is a mental health crisis in this country today. Even the new president of the Royal College of Psychiatrists himself said this week that our mental health wards are, I quote, unacceptable, uninhabitable and dangerous. There's no excuse for the Prime Minister's complacency. He once again relies on a promise made in a review, but when will he act to introduce a maximum waiting time and equal rights for all mental health patients?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A year ago, I asked the Prime Minister why, under his new early release from prison scheme, dangerous criminals are being let out early against the express advice of probation officers. The Prime Minister promised me that it would be looked into, but it is still going on. One person released early under this scheme returned home and stabbed his girlfriend. He said, "I cannot believe they have let me out. I told them I would do it." Why hasn't the Prime Minister stopped this from happening?
Mr. Speaker, less than 1% of prisoners who have been released within 18 days of the due date of the release have been guilty of any further crimes. And so it is bad when any instance happens, but he has to accept that it is a very low proportion of those that have been released. We have also instructed prisons that they should now ensure that the police are notified in response to any information that they receive that a prisoner poses a risk of domestic violence. So since the incident that he is talking about, we have stepped up our checks, and these will continue to ensure that people are not released if they pose a risk of domestic violence.
But I warned the Prime Minister about this a year ago. And the fact is, nothing was done. The head of the probation officers said on the radio, well, we brought it up last year, and as far as I can see, they've done nothing. Doesn't the Prime Minister realise how serious this is? Probation officers said this week there are at least 29 cases, and in every one, probation staff took the view the men weren't suitable for release. On the issue of domestic violence, which he raises, in 8 cases, men convicted of domestic violence who were released early went back and beat up their wives or their partners. How could this possibly be allowed to happen a year after the Prime Minister said he would stop it?
Mr. Speaker, I've just explained how we've stepped up the checks in response to the National Association of Probation Officers, and I have to say to him that we are increasing the number of prison places. They've increased from 60,000 to 80,000 during the period of this government. They're going up to over 82,000 this year and will rise again to 86,000. So the idea that we are not taking action to deal with the bigger problem, and that is the provision of prison places, is wrong. We are taking the action that is necessary. And I have to remind them, during the last 10 years, there are 16,000 more police on the street. We have more community support officers, and at the same time, crime is down by 30%. And it would have helped, Mr. Speaker, if the opposition had voted for some of our measures. The opposition voted against our measures on gun crime to 5 years for holding a gun. They voted against our measures on DNA. They voted against measures on antisocial behaviour in the period that he was trying to hug hoodies.
No one will ever forget that he was the Chancellor of the Exchequer who didn't build the prisons that has landed us this mess. It's absolutely no consolation to the people who are the victims of domestic violence that he reads out this list of completely irrelevant figures. And he says that they are stepping up the checks, but will he confirm there are no proper accommodation checks about where these people are going back to? There are no proper risk assessments. Isn't it the case that under his new early release scheme, people are released even though the probation officers don't know where they're going, haven't assessed them for risk, and they end up committing further crimes? A year ago, he told me in this House he would act. Surely people will conclude he's failed in his basic duty, which is keeping people safe.